The story of Sinuhe. The story of Sinuhe is one of the earliest historical novels. It tells the tale of a servant in the palace who overhears a plot to kill the Pharaoh Amenemhotep, founder of the 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom. Fearing that he would be implicated, he ran from Egypt and settled in Syria, where he raised a family. However, he missed Egypt terribly and did not wish to be buried abroad. Thankfully, Pharaoh Sinuhe's eye, Sinuhe's red eye, pardoned him and allowed him to return home. There are a number of different sources for this story. The beginning of the tale appears on a limestone ostracan over a meter long, below. The oldest version of this tale dates to the reign of Amenemhotep III, c. 1800, but it is thought the tale may have been composed during the reign of Sinuhe II, c. 1875. Sinuhe recounts, in his old age at his location of forced exile by the Red Sea coast, the events of his life. His tone expresses cynicism, bitterness and disappointment. He says humans are vile and will never change, and that he's writing down his story for therapeutic reasons alone and for something to do in the rugged and desolate desert landscape. Sinuhe begins his life as a foundling discovered in a reed boat in the Nile, and grows up in the poor part of Thebes. His adoptive father Semit is a doctor, and Sinuhe decides to walk in his footsteps. As an assistant to a royal doctor who knows his adoptive father, Sinuhe is allowed to visit the court. During a trepidation on the dying Amenhotep III, here's Sinuhe, the young crown prince Akhenaten and Hormuzd meet for the first time. Well educated, Sinuhe sets up a clinic and acquires the sly and eloquent slave Kapta, who will be his companion and close friend throughout his life. One day he gets acquainted with the gorgeous woman Nefernefer and is bewitched by her. Nefernefer gets Sinuhe to give her everything he owns, even his adoptive parents' house and grave. When the woman has realized that Sinuhe has run out of possessions, she gets rid of him. Ashamed and dishonored, Sinuhe arranges his adoptive parents to be embalmed and buries them in the Valley of the Kings. They had taken their lives before eviction, after which he decides to go to exile in the company of Kapta to Levant, which was under Egyptian rule at the time. In Syria, his medical skill earns him fame and wealth. During an Egyptian military operation in Syria, he re-encounters Hormuzd, serving as a military commander. From this, Sinuhe is commissioned to travel at his expense in the known world to determine what military potential the established nations have. Sinuhe, in company of Kapta, travels first to Babylon, where he engages in science and socializes with the city's scholars. One day he is summoned to the sick king Berabirish, whom he manages to cure. Soon Kapta is selected for the traditional Day of the False King, where the city's greatest fool is king for a day and then killed. A young Cretan woman named Mania has been recently acquired to the king's harem against her will. During a feast, Sinuhe, in the process of falling in love with her, smuggles Mania and Kapta from the palace and flees with the two to the neighboring country Mitanni. From there they proceed to Anatolia and to the fast-growing Hittite Empire. Sinuhe and his companions feel unhappy about the militarism and tough rule of law that characterize the kingdom of the Hittites, and they decide to leave Anatolia and sail to Crete, Minea's homeland. Minea has grown up with the mission to sacrifice herself as a virgin to the local bull god who lives in a mountain cave at the sea. Sinuhe is horrified by this and fears that he will not see her again. In the evening before Minea should enter the mountain cave, they marry each other unofficially. A while after Minea has been escorted into the mountain cave, Sinuhe enters the cave in search for her. He finds Minea's dead body and the remains of the Cretan god, described as a bull-headed sea serpent, and realizes that she has been killed by the god's high priest Minotaurus to prevent her from returning and telling the god is dead. Sinuhe loses his mind from grief, but Kapta eventually succeeds in calming him down and convinces him that it's best to move on and return to Syria. In Syria, Sinuhe returns to medical profession and regains his previous status. He notices, however, that the Egyptian sovereignty in the area has now begun to be questioned and threatened. This rebellious mood is triggered not in the least by the Syrian, Hittite-friendly Prince Pharaoh, whom Sinuhe still befriends, among other things, through a medical assignment. One day Sinuhe decides to return to Egypt. He sails to Thebes and opens a clinic for the poor in the same neighborhood he grew up in. He does not get rich in this, being driven by ideological motives instead. His slave Kapta, now released by Sinuhe, instead becomes a businessman and buys a pub called Crocodile's Tail. There Sinuhe meets a woman named Merit, who becomes Sinuhe's life partner. In Egypt, a new king, Akhenaten, has begun to convey a monotheistic teaching centered around the sun god Aten. According to Akhenaten's doctrine, all people are equal, and in the New World Order there no longer would be slaves and masters. Aspects of Akhenaten proved to be unpopular, his pacifism, among Hormuzd and others concerned with the threat of Syrian and Hittite invasion. His attempts at redistributing property to the poor, and his worship of Aten at the exclusion of the old gods, among the clergy of the mighty state god Ammon. Sinuhe is attracted to the teachings that the new king proclaims and, as he feels, focus on light, equality and justice, and joins Akhenaten's court. After a particularly violent public incident, Akhenaten, fed up with opposition, leaves Thebes with Sinuhe to Middle Egypt where a new capital, Akhenaten, dedicated to Aten, is built. However, the conflicts between Ammon and Aten continue, and it all develops into a civil war. Aten's kingdom on earth begins to fall, and the courtiers, one after another, abandon Akhenaten and Akhenaten in favor of Ammon and Thebes. The final battle also takes place in Thebes. Sinuhe fights for the sake of Aten and Pharaoh to the end, but ultimately the side of the Ammon priesthood is victorious. During the chaos, Merit and her son Thot are killed. The latter would turn out to be Sinuhe's offspring. When defeat has become reality, Akhenaten dies after having drunk a cup of poison mixed by the embittered Sinuhe. Queen Nefertiti's father, takes the throne, after the boy King Tutankhamun's short reign, despite Sinuhe having realized from time that he himself is of royal blood and must be the son of Amenhotep III and his Mitannic consort, and thus closer to the throne. With the Akhenaten out of the way, Hormizd gathers all fit men and conducts a full-scale war against the Hittite kingdom, Egypt's premier rival at this time. Both Sinuhe and Kapta participate in this battle, as Sinuhe wanted to know what war is like. A peace treaty is ultimately established, and King Aziru and his royal family are captured and publicly executed. Sinuhe later succeeds with Hormizd and A's mission to assassinate the Hittite prince Shubatu, secretly invited by Bakutamin to marry her, preventing him from reaching Egypt and seizing the throne. Sinuhe now goes back, afflicted by all the losses, to a simple dwelling in Thebes, bitter and disillusioned in the heart. Every now and then he is visited by his former servant Kapta, who only becomes richer and richer, and is now Sinuhe's patron. Sinuhe begins to criticize the new regime led by his old friend Hormizd, and as a punishment for this he is exiled to the Red Sea coast.